continuing the Living History series with my friend Amy South. And together we interviewed a lady by the name of Diane Maire. And she has a fascinating history that gives you some details about the hotel business in Battle Creek, as well as life on the Caribbean seas. So come along and join me.
Okay, my name is Amy South, and I'm talking today with Diane Maire, and she's living here at North Point Woods. And so, Diane, tell us a little bit about yourself and your family and where you grew up.
I grew up in Goshen, Indiana,
Okay.
which is not very far from here, probably 60 miles, 70 miles. I was raised there and met my husband there, went to high school there, went to all grades there, went to college at Goshen College even.
But you said you met him when he was...
I met him when he was in the 4th grade and I was in the 3rd grade.
Uh-huh.
So I'd known him for a long time, but we never actually dated until college time.
You went to college together?
Yes. Well, no, he went to IU and I went to Goshen College.
I see.
And we
How'd you get together then?
Well, he liked to dance.
Oh.
And I liked to dance. And I had a very good friend who was not a boyfriend, but he was a friend. And he liked to dance with me. So we would go to a lot of the after-school dances, or after football games and basketball game dances. And my husband came home from college one time, and the guy I went to the dances with was a neighbor of Mark's. My husband's name was Mark. And he said to my friend, Mark said to my friend Jan, "Are you dating Diane?" Oh. And he said, no. He said, well, then you wouldn't mind if I asked her for a date.
Oh.
And Jan said, well, I don't care. So that's how we kind of got started.
Uh-huh.
But I had known him for a long time because we went to the same elementary school together. And we started dating, and I'm a good dancer. He was a really good dancer. And that's kind of how everything got started, was just the fact that we both loved to dance.
Uh-huh. Good.
So we went together for a couple of years, and during that period of time we got engaged and that kind of thing. We got married when I was 21. I had just turned 21, and he was about to turn 22. So we got married relatively young.
Yes.
And started a family, and...
Your family come right away, or...?
Pretty quick.
Did it? Okay.
I had 3 in under 3 years.
Oh, I guess so, yeah. And what about the hotel business?
Well, that kind of happened accidentally. My husband started out as a manufacturer's rep, and then we had an opportunity to buy the business that he was working for, and that was kind of the beginning of our...
Was it a motel in the first place?
No. It was a manufacturing business.
I see.
It was a rubber company.
Oh.
And then they had a satellite that was built in Coldwater, and he became plant manager there. And
So when you moved to...
That's when we moved to Coldwater from Goshen. And with our kids, who were not terribly thrilled to move away from all their friends, but they became very quickly involved in the community. And
So how old were they when you moved?
my daughter was going into her freshman year of high school. My second daughter was going into the 7th grade, and my son was in the 6th grade.
Yeah, that's a hard time.
Yeah. It's a tough time to move. But my oldest daughter at that time was 13 years old, and a very pretty girl. And one of the boys in the neighborhood noticed that this very pretty girl had moved nearby. And that kind of got her off and going, because he was a very popular person in high school. And suddenly she was Dean's girlfriend.
Oh.
So that's how that kind of got started. And I had been trying to think I was an insurance adjuster, and that's how I got to know you, Amy.
Oh, was it?
Yeah.
Okay.
But I worked. I started working for an insurance agency when I lived in Goshen, Indiana, and subsequently became an adjuster for Cincinnati Insurance Company,
Yeah.
and worked for them for quite a long time. It was a good job, and met a lot of interesting people doing that job. And that's pretty much it. We had an opportunity. Mark was working for a company that was a rubber company. They decided to sell the satellite, and we were able to buy it. And we bought the satellite rubber company, and the offer you can't refuse kind of came along, which was very, very financially beneficial for us.
Yeah.
And so he sold that company, and started looking for something to buy,
Uh-huh.
and that's how we ended up buying the motel
In Battle Creek?
in Battle Creek.
Uh-huh.
Yes, so we moved to Battle Creek, and at that point, while our children were
Out of school?
and that
Out of
kind
school.
thing, yeah. And it was a very lucrative business. My daughter worked as our
She was
innkeeper. She was our
Yeah.
innkeeper. But what they discovered was that Battle Creek had a contract with all of the people with the railway. They had
Grand Trunk, or?
Yes, it was Grand. I think it was Grand Trunk. And they had to. The contract said that the people who worked on the trains
Yeah.
had to have a certain number of hours of break.
Uh-huh.
And we went after that business.
Oh.
And it became very lucrative because we had a group of rooms that were set aside just for them. We had satellite TV that was in there. We had reclining chairs. We gave them breakfast. We did lots of things
Yeah.
for them that did not happen for the average customer. And when we had an opportunity to sell the inn, we had Japanese people that came to look at buying it,
Uh-huh.
and they couldn't believe what our occupancy was, because we had 100% occupancy, which all sounds like a hot sheet motel,
Yeah,
but it
right.
wasn't. It
So
wasn't.
you had the people from the Grand Trunk?
We had Grand Trunk, but they came. We turned over those specific rooms 3 times a day. So we had
3 times a day?
300% occupancy in this
Oh my
in
goodness.
this block of rooms,
Oh.
because we had people staying there, and we had housekeeping that came in. As soon as a person would leave, the housekeeping people would be there. We got the people from Grand Trunk to go down to our lobby because we furnished food for them. They got them out of the room so the housekeeping people could get in there, so that by the time the next group of people came, the room was clean, all the sheets were clean, everything like that.
So they didn't stay 24 hours, or?
Oh no, they didn't, because they had to take an 8-hour break.
Oh,
And so we went after that business.
that's pretty lucrative.
And there were a lot of motels in town that didn't like having that. They missed the boat.
Oh.
They really missed the boat. So when we decided that we were going to sell the motel, we had a Japanese firm that came in and looked at it, and they couldn't believe what our occupancy was.
Mm-hmm.
They thought we were fudging the books. And they worked and worked and worked, and they gave us a wonderful, I mean, a big payout.
Mm-hmm.
So that was when we could buy a boat,
Oh.
a nice big boat.
Yeah, and that's something you always wanted to do, is that
Well,
right?
we were already sailing on Lake Michigan.
Uh-huh.
We had purchased a 37-foot sailboat, and that we sailed that on Lake Michigan all the time. But it was a boat that had crowded quarters and that kind of
Yeah.
thing. And then we had an opportunity to buy a bigger boat for Lake Michigan, and that was the Brain of Pooh.
Oh.
And I had the Brain of Pooh, and we sailed that all over Lake Michigan. I went to Milwaukee and Chicago and Escanaba.
Uh-huh.
We were all over Lake Michigan.
And that was from the stories of Winnie the Pooh.
That was from the Winnie the Pooh.
Uh-huh.
So this was the boat that my in-laws had, and that's why Mark started sailing. And when he discovered that I was not afraid of sailing, I loved it. That was all the better for me, because he wanted.
It was something you both liked to do.
It gave me a leg up. Let's put it that way.
Yeah.
And So we did quite a lot of sailing together with his family. And then after we got married, we had an opportunity. We had got children in a relatively rapid succession.
Yeah.
So we weren't sailing very much then. But we finally moved to Coldwater, and we lived on a lake there, and so we had a smaller sailboat there. And then when we were able to afford to get a bigger boat, we put that one on Lake Michigan. And this was the sailboat that was the first one that we bought.
Uh-huh.
And it was called Valkyrie, which is from Ride of the Valkyries. And it is about maidens flying through the sky or whatever. And something I should add is that my husband and I are both Scandinavian.
Yeah.
Have exactly the same heritage. We're both Swedish and Danish. So I referred to us as the Vikings.
Yeah, right.
It was in our blood. It was
Vikings
in our
was
blood.
in the blood. Yeah.
Yeah. So this was the Brain of Pooh.
Uh-huh.
That was a 42-foot boat.
But originally you wanted to go around the world, is that right?
No, I never
Oh,
wanted
you
to go
never
around
wanted to
the
go
world,
around
no.
the world.
I would sail all over the Atlantic, but I didn't want to go someplace where I couldn't speak English. And you go around the world, you're going into all kinds of
You sure
areas
are.
where you really have no clue.
Right.
And during that time, and still to this day, there's quite a lot of pirating going out.
Yeah.
So we were loaded for bear. But nothing ever happened.
Uh-huh.
Nothing ever happened. But we had the Brain of Pooh, and that was on Lake Michigan. And then when we bought the boat for the Atlantic Ocean, I said to my friends, "What should we name the boat?"
Yeah. What did you decide?
You remember Dottie Bromley?
No.
Okay, well, she was from here in town.
Uh-huh.
And she said, "Well, why not name it Pooh Grew?"
Pooh what?
Grew.
Grew. Oh.
So the Brain of Pooh got bigger.
Oh, I see.
So on the back of the transom, you had Winnie the Pooh going like this.
Oh.
And we sailed to a lot of really, really good places. Pirates Cove is way up in the...
Where?
It's up in the North Channel.
Oh.
And there's a cove there that was really wonderful. It was part of that chain. And we used to go there and drop an anchor. It was such a private little cove that you would tie your boat to a tree.
Really?
You'd drop an anchor at the back, and you'd have the
tree?
thing tied to a tree.
Uh-huh.
And there were all kinds of boats that would be in there. Everybody was very creative in how they were going to keep us from hitting each other. But it was a wonderful place to go.
Yeah.
Very cold. The water was very cold because it was way up in the North Channel.
Did you stay in the boat most of the time?
Oh, yes.
Mhm.
Yeah, we did.
You always stay in the boat. Yeah.
We lived in the boat.
Yeah.
If we were on land, we would have to find some place to live. But as long as you're living on a boat, you might as well live on the boat.
Live on the boat.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So anyway,
So where else did you go?
when we bought the Pooh Grew, the big boat,
Uh-huh.
we bought it in Fort Lauderdale. And my daughter lives in Charleston, South Carolina. So we sailed from Fort Lauderdale up to Charleston.
Yeah.
And we kept it there during the summer because we wanted to do a lot of provisioning, and we had to bring the boat. It was a used boat. So we had to do a lot of things to bring the boat up to the point where we could sail it for 1,000 miles.
Mm-hmm.
And then the nice thing about Charleston is that it's a great place to provision because there are so many boats there that you have specific places where you can go and get the things that you
Yeah.
need for provisioning. So we did that, and we decided that we had gone to a conference in Antigua, which is in the West Indies. And we liked that island so much, and it was English speaking. We decided that would be a good place to sail to. So
How far away was that?
about 1,000 miles.
Uh-huh.
And so we took off from Charleston, and I called Donna Gray,
Donna Gray. Yeah.
and
Yeah.
I said, "Well, we're on our way," and she said, "Well, take a picture." And she said, "Can you still see land?" And I said, "Yeah."
Uh-huh.
So she said, "Well, take a picture."
Yeah.
So I have a picture that I took. I don't know where it is anymore, but it was of us looking back at Charleston from probably a couple of miles out.
Yeah.
It took us 2 weeks to get down to Antigua.
How long were you without seeing land?
2 weeks,
2 weeks.
yeah.
Mhm.
Because you're really, really offshore.
Yeah.
And at one point we had an egret that landed on the boat.
Was that what that was? A big bird?
That was a bird.
Uh-huh.
A bird.
The egret.
It landed on the boat, and I think it was just tired. It had been flying for a long time. Well, looky there, it's a place to land.
Yeah.
It became so tame
Yeah.
that at one point I go down into my galley, and it's standing there, and I picked it up and threw it up the gangplank,
Yeah.
the gangway rather. But I mean, at one point I walked into my head and it's standing on the toilet.
Oh my goodness.
It's crazy, but it became very, very tame.
Uh-huh.
And slept. And at night it would sleep under the dinghy, because the dinghy was lashed to the front deck,
Uh-huh.
and that was be where it would sleep.
But then finally at what?
At one point, finally, I think we probably got within a day or two of land for our boat. We still couldn't see it, but Margaret was the name of the egret.
Margaret.
Margaret.
Who
Margaret
named it
Egret.
Margaret?
I named it
You
Margaret.
named her Margaret.
Yeah. Have no idea whether it was a boy
Whether-
or a girl, but it was Margaret.
Margaret.
And all of a sudden, Margaret was gone, and within a day we were inside of land. And
So it probably knew that it
oh
was.
yeah, I'm sure it did. Knew. In the meantime, it took the easy way out. Migration is much better if you're riding on a boat.
I guess so. Yeah. Yeah. You have to pay
Anyway,
for it. Yeah. Did you see other people when
when we were sailing,
like
no,
that 2
no,
weeks?
no.
You saw no one. Did you see other ships?
Yes.
You did.
So- And of course, you have to be on watch all the time. You can't just everybody go to bed. You have to have somebody on
Oh,
watch all the time.
really?
I mean, you're out in the middle of the ocean, and there are other boats out there.
Yeah.
So you always had somebody that was on watch, and there were
So you
usually
said-
two of us. My sister and my brother-in-law sailed with us. They
That time?
both loved sailing,
Oh.
and they had an opportunity. We told them. We said, if you want to go with us, my sister took an early retirement,
Yeah.
and they took off to sail with us, and they sailed with us for 2 years.
Oh, they did.
Uh-huh.
Oh.
And then the third year, they said, we're going to do something else,
Yeah.
which was fine. And but we had a wonderful time together. And it was wonderful to share it with family, because we still reflect on that to this day.
Yeah.
All the fun things that happened to us.
Could you write home to your kids, or did you get any?
My husband did a lot of that. We had a computer on board,
Oh.
and we also had a shortwave radio.
Uh-huh.
And so we could communicate with people on shore.
I see.
But then we also, my husband could also, it was kind of like email. It wasn't quite that point, but it was that way of communicating. So they always knew where we were and what was going on, and that everybody was safe. Nobody had fallen overboard.
Yeah. Yeah.
But I'll tell you what, there were times when the seas were very, very rough, and you would be lashed to the boat.
Really?
Yep, we both had harnesses.
Yeah.
Put the harnesses on, and we'd attach them to the mast. And then, because you have to do things,
Yeah.
and wherever you were, you lashed yourself to the boat.
Uh-huh.
So should you happen to fall overboard,
Yeah.
you wouldn't be left in the dust.
Yeah.
But that never happened. The only time I went overboard was when I chose to.
Oh. Did you choose to do that?
Well, once we got to
Okay.
land,
Yeah.
and it was great to be able to jump into the water and swim and all that kind of
Yeah.
stuff. We had an easy way to get back onto the boat again, so
Uh-huh.
it wasn't a problem.
And you did all your cooking and everything right there.
Yep. And
So you had to plan ahead.
well, yes, when you do your provisioning, you're thinking ahead,
Uh-huh.
and you buy things that are not going to spoil. We did have a very good refrigerator, and that worked fine. And as long as we had, because you had to keep your batteries charged, you ran your engine for a certain amount of time. It was a diesel, and you run it for a period of time,
Uh-huh.
so you could get all your batteries recharged.
Yeah.
And then you turn it off.
Yeah.
Seldom do we ever have to motor. We were almost always under sail.
Really?
Yeah. And you learn how to tack. You know what tacking is. And so if you don't have the wind in exactly the right place you want it to be, you kind of go like this. But you're getting eventually getting to your destination.
So with 4 people on board, then you didn't have to stay up all night, or you
Well,
could
my sister
take
and I
turns?
usually took the night watch.
Oh, you did?
Yeah.
Together?
Yes. And she would come up with me, and whoever was on watch was on watch.
Oh.
And my sister or I would sleep on the deck until it was our turn to be on watch.
Yeah.
But we were always on watch at night when the guys were sleeping, because they had a lot of things they had to do during the day.
Yeah.
You have to maintain an engine, you have to maintain a lot of stuff. And because they were both very mechanically talented, they took care of those things during the day.
Yeah.
The interesting thing is if you've got something going on with the steering, and they have to go down and do oil or something like that. So I've got this great big wheel. My husband would say, "Now don't turn the wheel."
Don't turn the wheel.
Yeah.
What?
So I'm supposed. It's not always all that easy. Because they were working with things that were going back and forth that were would chop their fingers off. They didn't want to have move the wheel all that much. So fortunately, never chopped anybody's fingers off. Nobody got hurt.
Is that right? Yeah.
But it was an interesting challenge, I must say.
So then how about your sister said they didn't want to go anymore?
They went with us for 2 years. The third year, they had decided that they both had retired. They decided that they were done sailing. And so they bought a very nice big motorhome. So they said, we have a yacht on land. So we had ours in the water, and they had theirs on land.
On land.
Yeah.
So they traveled around.
Oh, they traveled all over the place. And we would, after we sold our boat, we would go out there and we would travel with them.
Yeah.
So we got a chance to see
So then you
the
had a
Grand
year.
Canyon and a lot of the places that are out west. We did a lot of traveling with them doing that kind of thing.
So you had a year on your own then, just the 2 of you?
Just the 2 of us. Now when we got to the point where we had to be sailing back to the United States, it was one thing if we were just sailing from a port to a port, which is mostly what we did. We didn't do a lot of long distance sailing. The long distance sailing was usually coming and going. The rest of the time was living on the boat and sailing to this little island to that little island.
And that little island.
Yeah. And
were those islands all populated and?
yeah, oh gosh, yes. In the West Indies for sure.
Okay.
And we sailed to the Virgin Islands, and we sailed to the Bahamas. So we've been to all those islands down there, and that was great fun.
Did you see a lot of islands that weren't inhabited, or?
No, but there were some that were more populated than others. For example, if you go to like the Bahamas, Nassau is a big town, big city.
Yeah.
And we spent time in Nassau. And
Did you?
There's an area that's around the Bahamas that's called Paradise Island, which is way up north. That's a beautiful place to sail up to. And when you go into Paradise Island, you have to have a pilot, because there are so many shoals and so many places where we drew a lot of water. So we had to, you have to have at least 7 feet of water in order to get our boat through. So we would hire a pilot, and he would come on board, and then he would steer us safely through the channel until we got to Nassau or wherever we were going, Paradise Island, whatever.
And then he'd leave you.
And he'd leave, yeah.
And then you'd go on.
Yeah, we would go on. When you hire them and they charge you, and you pay for their transportation coming and going, because they were always flying. But it was a comfort to have somebody. And the guy that we used all the time was good fun. I mean, he had a really good sense of humor. And he and I would play games like crazy during the day.
Yeah.
So anyway, it was a fun thing.
Yeah.
Our boat was 57 feet long. It had a mast that went up 60 feet, which meant if you were in Charleston, South Carolina, you couldn't go under the bridge.
Oh.
Because the mast was too tall to go under the bridge. Not all of the bridges, obviously, but the ones that were where my daughter was, we couldn't go under the bridge.
And so what did you do?
we had a car
Oh,
and we drove.
uh-huh.
But
So
so we stayed in the deeper water, but we could still be in Charleston and be tied up to a marina dock and that kind of thing. When we lived in Coldwater, we had an O'Day that was 37 feet long, and that was the first boat that we had that could sail in bigger water, Michigan.
Yeah.
And we hit that boat from the 37-foot boat we had for 1 year. We bought it brand new. There's a disease when you're sailing called 2-foot-itis.
What is that?
That means that no matter what size your boat is, you want one that's at least 2 feet long.
Yeah.
Well, we made a major jump. We
You
went
did?
from 37 to 42 to 57.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
But that was fun. We had Pooh grew from 1993 to 2000. And the 42-footer we had for like 5 years.
Uh-huh.
And with Pooh grew, we had that from 1993 to 2000.
Is that when you stopped?
That's when we sold the boat.
Yeah.
As we are sailing into Fort Lauderdale,
Yes.
this is 2000, I said to Mark, I think I'm done. He said, thank God. He said, I'm done too.
Oh, yeah?
Yeah, we had the opportunity to do what we wanted to do. We were very fortunate that we could afford to do that because
Yeah.
we were still 50 years old.
Uh-huh.
So, it gave us an opportunity to do it. My husband's health became an issue, and so we had an opportunity to do the thing we had always wanted to do while he was still in good health.
Was it an issue before you landed then or after?
It became an issue when we were going to be sailing back by ourselves.
Uh-huh.
And that's when I said, I think we need somebody to sail with us.
Uh-huh.
Because if you get sick, and he eventually had a very severe stroke, but at that point he was still kind of tiptoeing around things. And I said, if something happens to you, I can't sail this boat and take care of you too. So let's get somebody to be with us while we're sailing back. It was one thing with my sister and brother-in-law, but when they were gone, it was just, so we got a guy, as I said, was lots of fun and loved to play games, and he was the one that sailed into it.
So you came from, how far did you go with him?
We were down in the Bahamas.
In the Bahamas?
At that point.
Uh-huh.
And he sailed back he flew into someplace, I can't even remember where exactly. I must have been Nassau. And we picked him up there, and he sailed with us until we got back to
What, Fort Lauderdale?
Fort Lauderdale.
Mhm.
And then he took an airplane and flew
Went
back to his home state.
Yeah.
And we put the boat up for sale.
Did you?
Mm-hmm.
In Fort Lauderdale?
Yep. And
How long did that take to sell it?
not quite a year.
Uh-huh.
But that's a number one. It wasn't a brand new boat. It was one that was in very good condition, but nevertheless, people would want to. Sometimes they want a bigger, either a nicer boat or a bigger boat, and so it took us about a year to sell it. But we sold it and we did fine. In the meantime, we have wonderful memories of those years of sailing, which is great.
Yeah.
So.
Did your family ever come and go on the boat with you?
2 of my 3 children get terribly seasick.
Really?
So, only my oldest daughter can tolerate it, but my Renee and Mark, they just couldn't. It got really seasick. I, on the other hand, never got seasick. I was never seasick. Even in the roughest of water, I never got seasick.
Did your husband?
Only in the roughest situation. I can remember one time he was puking off the transom, but that didn't happen very often. He was also a good sailor.
Yeah, but not you.
I never did.
Yeah.
If we weren't filming this, I would say something about that. But
Would you have any final stories to share?
just thinking about, we did meet some really interesting people along the way. And at one point, we met a couple, we were kind of at the same port, and they were heading the same direction we were. They had a trawler, which is motorized, but it's not like a speedboat, or a big yacht. It's slower. And they were a really nice couple. We really kind of had a wonderful time with them. Well, they were heading the same direction we were.
Were they?
So we agreed that we would meet when we got to the port. Well, for a while, they were ahead of us, and then we got the wind,
Oh.
and we got there way ahead of them, because a trawler doesn't go as fast as a big boat does.
Yeah.
And a sailboat, when you got a good wind, flies. I mean, we'd go 10 knots,
Yeah.
which is pretty fast for a sailboat. But it all has to do with the length of the boat. If you have a long enough boat, why,
Really?
it goes
Yeah.
faster, yeah. To a certain
Yeah.
point. Sailboats are never going to do what a motorboat can do, but
Yeah.
that's kind of it.
Yeah.
Nothing really comes to mind. There were lots of fun things that happened to us through that period of time, but it's kind of hard to go back that long and remember some of that little anecdotes.
But that eagle, or the eaglet, was
That
was quite a story.
egret.
Egret.
Yeah. Margaret.
Margaret the egret. Yeah.
Margaret became so tame it was like having a pet.
Really?
Yeah, it really was.
Did you have to feed her?
No, she never. We tried. We actually had some fish, but we would put it out for her, and she wasn't interested.
No?
So, I think when she finally took off, why, as I said, we were within a day of land, and I think that she was ready to go.
Yeah.
But it was interesting to have a bird land on your boat that becomes part of the family.
Yeah, I guess so. No, but we want to thank you for taking your time.
Oh, I'm happy to do it. It's fun to kind of go back and relive some of those wonderful days. It was we were extremely fortunate to be able to do that when we were still young enough to do everything.
Yeah. How long did your husband live after you landed then?
Oh, it was a long time.
Was it a long
Yeah,
time?
it was
Okay,
a long
because you're
time.
only
20 years maybe.
Uh-huh. Yeah.
But his health he was having some heart issues and that kind of thing. And that was the reason. Atrial fib, everybody knows about AFib.
Uh-huh.
That was his problem.
Yeah.
I finally got him.
Okay, well, thank you very much.
You're welcome. Happy to do it. It was fun.
Well, that's going to do it for today's tour through history with our special guest, Diane Maire. And I really appreciate you guys following along on this series, and hopefully I will do some more later this year on this. If you liked today's video, please take a minute to hit the like button down there, subscribe to the channel, and share the video with others. And until next time, thanks for watching.